Welcome to today's episode of the Working Wisdom podcast series, brought to you by the C.T. Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. We're having a conversation about work-life balance, how to navigate and overcome challenges within your career, and how to make business more accommodating to a diverse workforce.
Hello, I am Mark Garcia-Prats. I'm a full-time MBA student at the University of Houston's Bauer College of Business, and I have the honor today of hosting our Working Wisdom podcast, and I will be asking some questions and having a discussion here with Dr. Partha Krishnamurthy, who is a business marketing professor who has areas of expertise in decision-making, risk preference, and consumer behavior. He is also the director of the Institute for Healthcare and Marketing. In addition, he has done research on monitoring consumer behavior in healthcare with a focus on the opioid crisis in the U.S.
Yes.
And he also serves on the FDA Risk Communication Advisory Committee. And I am super excited to be asking him some questions and just sharing some time today and talking about business and decision-making in business, as well as, health and wellness and that work-life balance and how we make it all work within our lives and outside of our lives.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Mark, and we'll have some conversation, lots of different topics, but ready to rumble.
Wonderful. Let's rumble. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? So, how you got into academia, marketing, and then eventually healthcare?
Well, when I was doing my MBA back in India, I found myself simply not agreeing with the professors. I don't know whether MBA students are taught a concept called product life cycle that describes how a product is introduced and goes through a growth phase and and then becomes a big product and then starts declining. And for some reason, it was totally unappealing to me. And so I used to sort of have playful arguments with my teachers, and one of them said, maybe you should consider doing research because that's all they do, ask questions, disagree with established ideas. I had no clue what I was getting into, but then there was a friend of mine who had some experience applying to graduate school in the US, because I was in India and coming across continents is going to be a challenging task. And then he guided me along the way, and then within a year or two I found myself in the classrooms at Penn State, where I was a student of marketing, trying to understand how marketplaces work. And it's been a fascinating journey.
So quite a change to Penn State. I'm sure that was quite a lot of things to adjust to.
Yes, Penn State was an interesting place in the sense that I completely changed as a person, because very few people know that there is even something called a scholarly world of marketing. When you ask people what marketing is, they would say, well, it's about getting people to buy stuff. But there is a whole world of academic marketing whose questions are centered on why people buy, what do they look for when they buy stuff, how do they go about forming meanings associated with products in their lives. And then there are the quantitative aspects of questions like, well, how does a retailer decide how much to stock without overstocking or running out? Or how salespeople should be compensated so that they stay motivated at the same time they find meaning in their work. So there are all kinds of questions that academic departments like our own department here, Department of Marketing here at Bauer College of Business, that study. Mm-hmm. They don't study necessarily to make people buy more. They study to understand the process of consumption and how markets are made and lost. So that world fascinated me. Mm-hmm. And I have been very fortunate to come to a place like the University of Houston Bauer College of Business, and I have a fabulous faculty colleagues here who constantly enrich us with newer, more interesting questions that keep us ticking.
So you went to Penn State and you just really kind of maybe I could say fell in love with marketing and just that research side and really understanding decision making. When did you start asking questions towards healthcare from the marketing perspective? Like, when did your interest in that grow? Was that at Penn State, or was that later here in Houston? Or
Very interesting question, because I have actually thought about it, and to some extent I can trace my interest in healthcare to the fact that I was a pharmaceutical salesperson before I got my MBA. So that sort of prodded me towards marketing. But then I think what happened in 1997 with the FDA allowing for direct to consumer advertisements was somewhat of a precipitating event for me. I still distinctly remember that, because I got my PhD at Penn State on the topic of advertising and self-referencing, how an advertisement connects with a person and their lives. And then I saw a Wall Street Journal article on how the FDA is now going to allow people, pharmaceutical companies, to directly advertise to consumers products which the consumers cannot buy themselves, which was sort of interesting. Why would you advertise to a non-buyer? They can't go and say, you know what, I want this particular medication, but yet there was a clamor from the industry to allow that. And within a few months, if I'm not mistaken, or a year or two, direct-to-consumer advertising was the fastest growing segment within the advertising world. And so I was asking this question at some level, well, why do you advertise? And then it started opening up the world of decision making and health to me. And that's how I got into, there is far more to health and well-being than just taking a pill or going to the doctor or having a surgery, what have you. So as I started lowering my microscope, and this did not happen overnight, it's sort of a gradual
process.
shift. Yeah, absolutely. Over time, what started happening was I came to the position where I am right now, which is health is not consumed simply by referencing to the drugs, devices, and doctors. There's a fourth D, decision making. That before I realize that I need to take my pill, I needed to have decided to go to a physician. So the first domino that needs to fall in the disease or health cycle is the person recognizing that they have a problem.
So would you say that that's like one of the biggest differences from marketing in the healthcare industry and healthcare field compared to maybe more traditional business?
In terms of problem recognition, not really, because the traditional, if you take, say, marketing of vacations, for example, would also somehow cause you to see that there is a discrepancy in your life that can be fulfilled by taking a vacation. Likewise, the cholesterol reduction drugs manufacturer also wants to convince you that you may not have a symptom, but if your cholesterol is really high, it can cause a series of bad things that later might be very difficult to fix. So elevating the consciousness of the problem is a common theme. But I'm glad that you brought up this contrast, because I do want to explore that a little bit here. Consumption of health is very, very different from consuming vacations or restaurants. More often than not, people don't want to be consumers of healthcare. I really am not in the market for, I don't know, an ankle surgery or something like that.
I try to avoid the doctor whenever I can.
Exactly.
Against the advice of my wife. And
Right. And doctors do a fantastic job. Shout out to a very difficult profession. Yeah, sure, they make good money, but they constantly see people coming with problems. So it's a difficult job with what the doctors are doing. But what I found was what I'm starting to call this a reluctant customer or reluctant consumer. And how do you understand and help this customer live well? And this has taken me to the world of pain, opioid medications, the pain experience itself, which also has taken me to the world of what exactly is wellness and well-being and things like that. So it's been a sort of an interesting journey, I should say. Yeah, I've done advertising research, I've done experiments involving simple decision tasks done on paper and pencil, and now I'm getting the privilege and the opportunity of working on large data sets involving real patients and the real experiences. It is very humbling, to say the least.
so what do you find has been like for you been the most rewarding maybe outcome of your research? The way you've connected your research to practitioners, clinicians, doctors, you've done work for the FDA. Is there something maybe you're most proud of in the way those who are, informing or making policy have been influenced by the research?
I have not done much to say that I have been I'm proud of something or something, because truly there are a lot of people who are contributing phenomenal things. But I can tell what I'm taking personal meaning from. What is meaningful research to me now? For example, I'm working on projects in which, with colleagues literally across the other coast, on how to help patients wean off opioid medications which they started for their pain management. And I have seen documentaries of how pain can be one of the most debilitating, both physically and psychologically debilitating experiences, and how in search of a solution for pain, people start consuming opioid medications with an innocent expectation that they're going to get better, and they find themselves in a vortex and a whirlpool out of which there is not very many good escape routes. And there are some really awesome researchers out there doing fantastic work on trying to help them. And lately I've had the privilege of working alongside some of them, and I'm not able to talk about it in greater detail at this time simply because the work is ongoing and it's not published. But these are some outstanding researchers trying to use their intellectual capacity to truly help people who are suffering. And this involves anti-consumption in a sense, how to stop consuming. And this I find very meaningful, Mark. I cannot tell you enough. And when you do your statistical analysis, you do whatever things that as an academician you sit and do, behind every row of data there is actually a person who's struggling to come to grips with a problem that is on the inside of their body, and yet at the same time they cannot just take whatever is available for them. This is a difficult choice that they are making. So you see the decision making angle come in very dramatically. to take a pill or not take the pill? What else could I be doing to manage my pain and still lead a meaningful life? So to me, these are all essentially marketing questions, because marketers are those who actually try to help produce meaning in life. And oftentimes I tell my MBA students, when we think of the word marketing, we don't quite understand what it is. And if you want to really understand the role that marketing plays in society, look at what happens when there is a store closure because of storms or hurricanes or something like that. The entire society almost shuts down when there is no consumption.
After Harvey, we got quite a glimpse of that
Absolutely.
in Houston.
And I know that the first responders do a fantastic job putting their lives at risk to help other people. But there is also the silent majority of people who go do their jobs, open the stores, stock the shelves, and make it possible for society to be a society. That is why I tell, that is actually a way of figuring out the before and aftermath of an interruption like a hurricane is a great way of figuring out how the business machinery sort of is so integral to our social experience. And that is why I tell that when you look at marketing, don't look at it with a narrow lens of how to make people buy more.
Things, right.
Marketing is the glue that makes society possible. And marketing is actually the spark of social interaction at some level. I'm not talking about all social interaction is necessarily underwritten by dollars and cents, but what I'm trying to tell is that pretty much every activity that takes place because there is a market for that activity. And if we understand that particular idea, then we can start asking this question: why do people buy something and not buy something else? Why do people take more opioid medications than less? We can start understanding what makes a patient who's supposed to take 10-day course of their antibiotic stops after 4 days because they are starting to feel well, but in the process they are creating a whole slew of bacteria that are drug resistant and creating a bigger problem in the process. So the lens of how to help people engage in meaningful behavior that makes them better is what marketing is.
I've been really excited for this conversation. So I'm involved with Small Places LLC, which is a business in Houston that I founded with my two other brothers, and we are trying to basically turn Houston into, a hub for urban agriculture and urban farming.
Fascinating.
And so we have a farm in the east end here, about 2 miles here from campus, and it's about 1.5 acres.
Okay.
And so my brother Tommy is a farmer, so we've been running this now for 4.5 years, and my brother Danny's an engineer, so they both do this full time. I do this in my spare hours, my 5 to 9 I call it.
Okay.
But these questions of the reluctant consumer and decision making, what makes people come and purchase these strange vegetables that we're growing, or what makes them come and purchase our vegetables instead of go to Jack in the Box, 2 blocks down. And it is about wellness and living cooking your own food and knowing where your food comes from, and really having a diverse diet and well-balanced diet and nutrient rich food that's just been harvested. And urban farms are very much I connected to this idea of making meaning, because we talk, at least my brothers and I talk about we're creating culture.
Yeah.
And so the people that we found that are most interested in what we're doing are those that are willing to invest a lot in it. And so if we have this conversation often is how do we, there's obviously those group of people that are just going to buy in, they like what we're doing, they love coming to hang out on the farm, but how do we kind of extend beyond that? And how do we find those reluctant consumers? And we are asking people, we know we are making a big ask of people to,
To adopt a different
adopt a different diet. I mean, that's such a huge part of our lives and how we form our identity. And you have long habits of eating certain types of food, and so this is a conversation that we're like constantly engaging with. But similarly, we see people suffering on the other side of it, right? So it's like a very meaningful thing for us as we see just, and we, our farm is in a food desert. So there's a lot of people surround us that don't have access to fresh produce, that don't have access to vegetables and those things. So it's been, we have more questions than answers, I think, obviously.
Yeah, and the process of getting people to adopt a behavior is a challenging one. Not because people don't want to adopt behaviors that are salutary or good or self-fulfilling, meaningful, but because behaviors don't take place in a vacuum. There are alternative behaviors that they could engage in instead of buying fresh produce and then cooking it the way it is supposed to be done and deriving meaning from it, having the knowledge structure, the infrastructure, and a time to be able to transform that raw produce into a satisfying experience. It takes effort. That is one part.
Yeah, absolutely.
The second part is you have, for $1, I can get 2 pounds of stuff. That's easier because I'm running after something else. A third thing that is requiring my attention. So people cannot turn on and turn off behaviors because it's good or bad on its own right, but because behaviors take place in an ensemble of other behaviors in one's lives, and therefore the question is, you're not competing with any pick your name fast food restaurant. You're actually competing with other priorities in people's lives, and it's very hard to climb that mountain. It's easy to say that and easy to conceive, and entrepreneurs often think like, hey, why is it so difficult for you to see why my product is really kind of good for you? I mean, yes, you come in with a lens of having thought about the product and have been pained by its absence, and therefore it is meaningful and it is resplendent in terms of what it does to the customer. But the average customer simply doesn't have the time to even think about it.
Absolutely.
So they will eventually grow into being food farms. I have to throw in the word grow there. They have to grow into being your customer.
Absolutely.
They can't be produced.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to take a short break and have a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Bauer College's executive education program is training business professionals and leaders to tackle the challenges of tomorrow. Courses in consulting, strategy, analytics, project management, and more led by Bauer's award-winning faculty. Find open enrollment programs at bauer.uh.edu/exec.
Okay, we are back to the Working Wisdom podcast, and I am talking with Dr. Partha Krishnamurthy, and we've had a wonderful conversation about decision-making, healthcare, and marketing. And our conversation, we've kind of spent some time talking about just why decisions are made. And so I wanted to ask you just kind of what your insight is into why decisions are made. Like, what is decision making, and especially in regard to well-being? Like, why do we make these decisions about ourselves?
Great question. When we actually ask the question, what is decision making? It's basically picking a choice out of the variety of options that are available in front of us. It could be picking a particular movie over other movies, or going to movies versus kind of spending a day in the park or something like that, whatever the case might be. And the classic ideas of decision making is that people have some idea about what they like, and they look around as if we are going to a Home Depot and kind of looking for a particular nut or a bolt or something like that, and see the one that fits exactly what we want, and we buy it. Well, that's not how the world of decision making actually works. We don't have preferences which are hard and fast, and we don't know them, and the world doesn't offer an easy menu of, okay, this is too small and this is too big, he's just right. So decision making is that process of figuring out what you really want, stumbling along the way, figuring out where to look for options in the first place, and then, if it is important enough, agonizing over which is the right one, and then actually making the decision, and then looking back and seeing, was that the right one, or maybe I should have gone a different direction, and then doing it all over again, having a memory for what you did the last time, what went right, what went wrong, and then kind of projecting it into the future. Hey, you know what, last time I tried vanilla, it didn't work for me, next time I'll take chocolate ice cream. Sometimes decision makers don't even remember what it is that they liked and what they did not like. So decision making is a very complex phenomenon that takes place throughout our lives. In fact, that's what we do. We are decision making engines. We think we have some intelligence about what we like and what is out there, and we try to match that with that and learn along the way. So decision making is intimately connected to well-being, because you choose one thing in the hope that it is going to put you in a higher plane of meaningful existence. That could be as simple as, I'm thirsty now and here is some water, I consumed it, I'm less thirsty, and I'm able to focus on other things in life.
Mm-hmm.
To more grand things like, well, what am I going to do mid-career? I find no satisfaction in this one. What is life? And so I need to shift, go to grad school, or start a business, or start a kind of a non-profit, or go to some other part of the world, or serve in capacities towards people to unlock their potentials, what have you. People do different things. So decision making is that act of trying to optimize what is it that we want with what is out there, and doing it in a very imperfect, slow, sometimes agonizing way.
I can definitely identify with the agonizing. It's there's too many decisions to make every day. I think I even remember the story of President Obama, like limiting the number of decisions he had to make every day. So like people had to choose his ties. He didn't want to make any decisions about anything like menial, like what he was going to eat, ties, all that was made for him. Because decision makings is complex and agonizing. Absolutely. So how do you see, when taking that decision making and pushing it into well-being? I mean, what insight, when people are trying to make decisions about their lives, obviously it's different than choosing an item from Home Depot. In your research and as you've kind of thought about decision making, what are the challenges that people face when it comes to well-being?
Great question. And there is a whole world of research called positive psychology research, and there are many pioneers in this field. And I want to make it very, very clear that this is not a new concept at all, and it's not me who sort of stumbled into it. It is true that as a student of well-being, I got introduced into it. There is Professor Mark Seligman at UPenn, who does some outstanding work. Of course, there is Viktor Frankl, who has done some outstanding kind of work on developing insights into what really makes human beings tick, the role of meaning, and
what's his famous book, Viktor Frankl's
Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning, correct.
Right. So when we talk about decision making and well-being, we know that we make decisions to improve our well-being. But what we do not know is how does the connection actually take place. And in this regard, I also want to recommend listeners to a book called Flow, Flow, and it is by an author with a last name sort of more challenging than mine. His name is Csikszentmihalyi, but go to Amazon and type Flow. you're going to get hits to his fascinating book. And I'll give a 1 minute sort of a
Great.
summary of what the book basically tells. Mihai talks about this idea of optimal experiences that feel so good. And what makes them really, really good? He says that for any given moment, we exist on two dimensions. One is how much resources we have at that moment, and how much resources are demanded by the task at that moment. Let's say, for example, you're driving and you are in literally a zone. You know the place, nothing new. It's a route that you have taken every day. You know exactly where the choke points are going to be. You know exactly when you should make the lane shifts and stuff like that. Driving produces what is called an optimal experiences for many people. Some people in Houston may disagree with that idea, but
I'm kind of might be one of those at the moment, having just driven
I
here.
agree. You came from Katy, so all Katy residents are exempted from this maxim. But what I mean is, when you are a master of the task, meaning you know exactly what needs to be done, you know how to do it, and you have all the resources to do it, then there is a beautiful streamlined flow of your resources onto the task itself. You might have seen that in your own day-to-day experiences. It might be cooking a meal, or it might be running and you find that zone there, or it might be doing some gardening, it could be playing with your kids, what have you. There are many experiences that seem just right. It is not because they are too difficult or too easy or positive or negative or something like that. Experiences become optimal when the task resources sort of are meeting that which the person has to offer. So Mihai says, if the task is too demanding and you don't have the resources, you get anxiety. If the task is not sufficient demanding and you are very good at it, you have boredom. And when you have boredom, you have turbulence. You think of other things. The mind needs something to chew on. So both of these two are suboptimal states, he says. Anxiety and boredom are the two states that we are really trying to avoid. That means picking tasks that are just slightly out of reach of our resources will produce well-being right now, right here. That is one of the insights that come from Mihai's work. We can spend 2 hours talking about that particular book and positive psychology, and therefore I'm going to stop here. But what I'm trying to tell is, when we make decisions, we need to be acutely aware of how much resources we bring to the table and how much resources the decision is going to require. If they are in synchrony, usually you will enjoy that experience, you'll keep coming back to that experience. On the other hand, if you constantly find yourself under siege by the tasks that you have taken, you probably are not having an optimal experience. Or if you're too bored, that's not good either.
So how does one, like, I mean, you're moving in between these two extremes, rather, like anxiety and boredom. And is that something stated in the book, or, like, is this something we only learn through experience?
In fact, that is a great point and a great observation, because that is exactly what happens as you accumulate experience over time. If you notice one thing, as people start getting more and more experienced in this thing called life, they become a little bit clearer about what works and what doesn't. And my hunch is exactly what yours is, that they become experts in what is too much and what is too little, and they become a little bit stable in their preferences. So there is actually a prescription that Mihai talks about. If you find the task too boring, increase its complexity. In fact, that's what you do. Let's say, for example, you're working in a task that's kind of a boring, like for example, you're proofreading or something like that, and it's kind of, you're too good at it, and but it's not complex enough. Well, your mind, whether you like it or not, will start looking for complexities in that. It'll start developing new lenses to look at that same little task, and then there might be aha moments. You know what? You'll be able to do things faster and enjoy it in the process. You will create your own little games in your mind. You know what? I can proofread now 3 pages in a given time rather than just one, and I'll do it more effortlessly, and I'll do it more streamlined manner, and so on and so forth. So that is an optimal experience. On the other hand, if you are too anxious, then you need to invest in the expertise building, kind of push back on execution and start spending time on what needs to be done to become effortless in that particular task. So what Mihai talks about is that recognize when you're going out of your zone. In fact, your mind will tell it. If you went through a task and it felt like breeze, that probably means it was an optimal experience. If it is a slog, it's no good. And if you're thinking about other things, it's no good either.
So to bring this back to marketing then, is how, as marketing, if you're in the healthcare field, if you're like us and you're trying to have people eat different, change their diets, eat healthier foods, I mean, how do you help people sort of lessen the extremes as they kind of go through this process? I mean, obviously you can't, how do you help people make decisions that are, are more in the mean? How do you help people be a little less anxious or make decisions that, are less towards boredom? Is that...
Great question. In fact, in marketing, we have a concept or a construct for it, we call it involvement. People who have very little resources, both cognitive, financial, emotional, behavioral, and who want very little from the task. Those are what we call low involvement customers. They want to be in and out, get the job done because they've got something else. Comes right back to the analogy that we were talking about earlier. And then for people for whom this is too boring, I know more about vegetables. I know how the whole supply chain works in the food industry, and I don't like it. I want something different. That person is bored by this one, and they would up their challenge and they say, you know what, I'm going to go to the local farm, and I'm going to get produce from there, and I'm going to create a whole new world of meaning around consuming fresh products, and in that process my boredom forces get eaten away and I get an optimal experience. We call this high involvement customers. And marketing is quite expert as a field in distinguishing between low involvement and high involvement customers. And oftentimes marketers fail when they try to market a high involvement product to a low involvement customer, or a low involvement product to a high involvement customer. The high involvement customer is bored, and the low involvement customer is overwhelmed with the product. So finding that optimal is something that marketplaces are very good at finding. They're good at shaking out offerings and people's resources and competencies and so on and so forth. So marketplaces actually, interestingly, is a great mechanism for figuring out what is an optimal experience. And in fact, that's what marketers try to give. A good marketer who's just not out to make a buck and kind of run away is genuinely interested in making your life a better life. They have seen some problems, they solved it for themselves. They say, you know what, if I've solved this problem for myself, then there may be enough number of people with this particular problem. Let me come up with a product that will be helpful. And they will find people, try to market to them because they also want them to have the optimal experience. So I want to circle back to what is the optimal experience, which is whenever you find yourself doing stuff either inside the home or outside at work with friends, where you feel that you actually have contributed meaningfully, time went in a flash and things like that, that would be an optimal experience. And marketers are trying to give you that. They're trying to make you less bored, or they're trying to make you more challenged depending on what your resource level is going to be. So So marketers are after well-being. Marketers are after giving you optimal experiences, and people gravitate towards optimal experience. The tragedy is that they do not know that something is more optimal than others, and they figure it out over a course of trial and error that lasts decades often.
Absolutely. Well, I know I have really enjoyed this conversation, Partha. I know I'm going to take this home and probably listen to it again afterwards when it's published online, and take some notes as well. Thank you very much for coming and sharing here with the Working Wisdom podcast. Thank everyone listening today, and have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful talking and sharing some thoughts, and this is an optimal experience for me in part because Mark had some fascinating questions, and it kind of made my resources used in an optimal way, and I'll remember this as well. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Working Wisdom podcast series from the C.T. Bauer College of Business, brought to you by the Working Families Initiative. The initiative aims to provide support and access for women in business school and the workforce, and to generate research that organizations can use to implement policies and standards to benefit a diverse workforce. For more information about Bauer College and this podcast series, visit www.bauer.uh.edu/podcast.